When we look up and ask if anything is looking back, we generally divide our answers into three camps: theists, who believe a higher power exists; atheists, who conclude one does not; and agnostics, who maintain the answer is ultimately unknowable. The oldest argument for a creator attempts to bypass belief with logic. It asks why there is something rather than nothing. If we trace the chain of cause and effect backward, we eventually reach an initial, uncaused cause that set the universe into motion. If we visualize the fundamental physical constants of the universe as dials on a cosmic dashboard, we find they are perfectly aligned. If gravity or electromagnetism shifted by even a microscopic fraction, life could never have formed. This is the premise of the fine-tuned universe. At this scale, the sheer mathematical precision points toward the work of a deliberate architect. Historically, Western theology has defined this architect through classical theism, the idea of a God that is simple, unchanging, and entirely beyond human comprehension. This concept isn't unique to the West. In Eastern traditions like Taoism and Advaita Vedanta, we find striking parallels: an ultimate reality that is fundamentally apophatic, meaning it can only be described by what it is not. However, when we shift our perspective from the precision of the stars down to the reality of Earth, the design feels broken. Our history is defined by disease, natural disasters, and human suffering. If the universe was crafted by a perfect designer, we have to ask why the micro-level reality is filled with so many inherent flaws. This is the problem of evil. It presents a logical paradox. An all-loving God would want to stop suffering, and an all-powerful God would be able to. Yet suffering persists. Theologians offered defenses called theodicies. Writers like C.S. Lewis argued that suffering is a necessary mechanism for human soul-making, suggesting that moral depth and free will cannot exist without the possibility of pain. Atheists counter this with Occam's razor. They argue that the simplest explanation for a world full of flaws is not a mysterious divine plan, but the absence of a God entirely. Since logic alone cannot settle the debate, the mathematician Blaise Pascal proposed a pragmatic pivot. Known as Pascal's wager, his theory suggests that betting on God's existence is mathematically safer than betting against it, given the infinite stakes involved. But this wager faces immediate pushback. Critics argue that it encourages a kind of inauthentic, fake belief, and it fails to address which of the world's many conflicting religions a person should actually bet on. When both physical observation and logical gambling end in a stalemate, we have to ask if we even possess the right language to debate the divine. In the early 20th century, the logical positivists argued that if a claim cannot be tested and verified by science, it is literally meaningless. By their standard, religious language fails to convey any factual information. Karl Popper introduced a different standard: falsifiability. For a statement to be scientific, there must be a theoretical way to prove it wrong. We can see this in the parable of the invisible gardener. When tests fail to find a gardener in a plot of land, the believer simply insists the gardener is invisible and intangible, continually shifting the definition so that the claim can never be proven wrong. However, philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein offered a defense for religious meaning that didn't rely on scientific proof. He proposed the concept of language games. Wittgenstein argued that religious words aren't failed attempts at science. Instead, they derive their meaning from how they function within our rituals, communities, and lives. Science and religion may speak different languages, but both are tools we use to organize our reality. This moves the debate away from the stars and directly into the human mind. To find the source of belief, we have to zoom past societal debates and instead look at the physical biology of the brain, down deep into the firing neurons of the cortex. This is the realm of neurotheology. This field maps how religious and mystical experiences physically activate specific networks in the brain, treating faith as a biological event. For the skeptic, this raises a question: is the concept of God simply an evolutionary survival mechanism, a story the brain tells itself to cope with the reality of existence? But for the believer, the data suggests something else. What if the human brain is specifically tuned as an antenna, built to perceive an external divine reality? We may never settle whether God is a cosmological fact, a linguistic tool, or a neural circuit. But regardless of the source, the impulse to look for the divine remains a defining constant of our history.